What if I told you that the San Francisco we know today, the skyline, the culture, even the city's reputation for innovation could have been drastically different?
Different how?
It all hinges on a few pivotal moments, a handful of decisions made in the wake of the 1906 earthquake. We're taking a deep dive into that pivotal year,
Okay, I'm intrigued.
with a specific focus on how the choices made before, during, and after the tremors really reshape the city's destiny, our main guide for this trip through time.
Let me guess. Some dusty old journal from a gold prospector.
Excerpts from an expert analysis aptly titled San Francisco Earthquake 1906.txt.
Even better. Gets right to the point. So where do we start?
What's interesting, what's often overlooked, is that San Francisco's rapid growth, fueled by the gold rush, played a significant role in shaping the impact of the earthquake.
The gold rush, right. Everyone rushing to strike it rich, and in the process, building a city almost overnight.
It was almost as if the city was on a collision course with destiny.
Makes sense. Fast growth often means overlooking potential risks. Out of sight, out of mind, right?
Exactly. It's like they say, sometimes success can make you blind to the dangers lurking around the corner. Speaking of which, our source mentions a report from 1899, just a few years before the earthquake.
Oh, a report foreshadowing doom. I love those. What did it say?
City officials were explicitly warned about the San Andreas Fault and the very real risk of a major earthquake.
They knew. So the question is, what did they do with that information?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? You'd think they would have hit the panic button, right?
Right. I mean, a major earthquake. That's not something you just ignore.
But surprisingly, the report's warnings were largely ignored. They chose to prioritize rapid development over addressing these concerns.
Wow, talk about a gamble. So why didn't they take it seriously?
It's easy to judge in hindsight, but at the time, the gold rush had created this atmosphere of relentless optimism, a belief that anything was possible.
I see. They were riding high on the success of the gold rush. Why worry about earthquakes when you're busy building the future?
Exactly. They were literally building a city from scratch, and the focus was on expansion, on progress, not on potential threats that seemed, at least to some, a bit distant.
So they underestimated the risk.
Yeah.
What were the consequences of that oversight, especially in terms of how the city itself was constructed?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, and where we start to see how seemingly unrelated choices can have a domino effect. Think about the building materials and practices common during the gold rush era. Rapid construction often meant cutting corners.
Get it built fast and cheap. Doesn't exactly scream earthquake-proof, does it?
Not at all. Our source actually goes into detail about the types of materials used back then. A lot of unreinforced masonry, timber framing, sturdy enough for a normal day, but
completely inadequate for a major earthquake.
right. Think about it. Brick buildings, while aesthetically pleasing, can crumble like cookies when the ground shakes violently.
And those timber frame structures, while more flexible, were often susceptible to fire, especially when you factor in the gas lines and electrical systems of the time.
And I'm guessing those weren't up to modern standards either?
Not even close. Remember, this was the late 19th century, a time of rapid technological advancement, but also a time when safety regulations, especially for something as unpredictable as an earthquake, were practically non-existent.
It's like they were playing with fire, in a way.
Literally. The San Andreas Fault, meanwhile, continued to build up stress with every passing year. Two massive tectonic plates grinding against each other, waiting to unleash all that pent-up energy.
So we've got this city, built more for speed than seismic stability, completely oblivious to the ticking time bomb beneath their feet. And then comes April 18th, 1906, just after 5 in the morning.
Just another day, or so they thought.
Can you imagine? Most San Franciscans were just waking up, going about their daily routines, completely unaware that everything was about to change.
The calm before the storm. Our source really brings those early morning hours to life, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What was it like when the earthquake actually hit?
Well, the source really paints a vivid picture of those first few moments, that initial tremor.
I bet people thought it was just a passing train or something at first.
Probably. But it quickly became clear this was no ordinary rumble.
Had to be terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. The escalating chaos, the sheer terror as buildings started to sway and crumble.
And that's when the real trouble started, right? The fires?
Fires.
Yeah.
Yeah, our source really emphasizes that it wasn't just the earthquake itself, but the fires that followed that caused the most destruction.
It was almost counterintuitive, right? You think earthquake, you think collapsing buildings. But when you consider the city's infrastructure at the time, it makes sense. Those narrow streets, wooden buildings cramped together, limited water pressure for firefighting.
It was a recipe for disaster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with the earthquake, you had ruptured gas lines, downed electrical wires, igniting debris everywhere. It created this perfect storm for a massive fire.
It's like the earthquake itself was just the beginning. It set off this chain reaction that spiraled out of control. And to make matters worse, the source mentions that even the city's leadership was completely overwhelmed.
Absolutely. Can you imagine being in charge in that situation? Total chaos, fires raging, communication systems down.
The mayor at the time, Eugene Schmitz, faced an unprecedented crisis, trying to coordinate a response effort with limited communication, widespread panic.
And fires raging out of control.
Yeah.
They had to bring in the military.
It did. Even the military called in to help struggled to navigate the devastated streets.
It really puts into perspective the challenges they faced. They were writing the playbook on disaster response as they went.
Definitely. And in those desperate times, they had to make some tough calls. The source mentions a particularly striking detail about how firefighters, desperate to contain the flames, resorted to using dynamite to create fire breaks.
Dynamite. Are you serious? Trying to fight fire with, well, more fire, essentially.
Desperate times, I guess. It just goes to show how desperate the situation was. They were really caught between a rock and a hard place. It's hard to imagine a city coming back from a disaster of that scale, but rebuild they did.
It's really a testament to the human spirit, isn't it? That ability to pick up the pieces and start over, even when everything seems lost.
Absolutely. And what's amazing is that San Francisco didn't just reconstruct what was lost.
They saw it as an opportunity.
They did. They used the experience to transform their approach to safety and preparedness.
You know, that's something we see time and time again throughout history.
What's that?
These pivotal moments, these tragedies, they often serve as catalysts for change, forcing us to confront our vulnerabilities and find better ways forward.
And in the case of San Francisco, those changes weren't just limited to the city itself.
Right, the impact rippled outwards.
It did. What's truly remarkable is how the 1906 earthquake served as a catalyst for change, not just in San Francisco, but nationwide.
Like I say, sometimes it takes a wake-up call to spark real progress.
And this was a major wake-up call. Think about it. Building codes, fire safety regulations, disaster preparedness plans. Many of these things we now consider standard practice have their roots in the lessons learned from that devastating event.
We owe a lot to the pioneers who had the foresight to say, hey, we can't let this happen again.
It's incredible to think that a single event could have such a profound and lasting impact on how we approach safety and resilience.
And not just safety, but also social equity.
That's a really important point. Our source really emphasizes that rebuilding wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about addressing the social inequalities that were exposed by the disaster.
Absolutely. The earthquake didn't discriminate, but the recovery process certainly did.
You're right. The source points out that different neighborhoods recovered at vastly different paces.
Those with pre-existing social and economic advantages were able to rebuild faster and with greater ease.
It's a sad reality, but it highlights the importance of considering these disparities, not just in the aftermath of disasters, but in our everyday lives.
We can't just assume everyone has equal footing. We need to be proactive in creating a more just and equitable society, one where everyone has the resources and support they need to thrive, regardless of their background.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a really important question. Over a century later, what echoes of 1906 still resonate in how we live and build today?
You know, it's all around us. The next time you're in a building, look around. Fire exits, sprinkler systems, even the materials used in construction.
These are not just random regulations. They are the direct result of lessons learned, often at a terrible cost, from events like the 1906 earthquake.
It's a reminder that we're constantly learning, constantly evolving our approach to safety and resilience.
It makes you wonder, what will future generations learn from the challenges we face today?
That's the beauty of it, isn't it? The story of human resilience is still being written.
It's a story of learning from our mistakes, adapting to new challenges, and always striving for a safer, more resilient future.
And it's a story that reminds us that we're all in this together, and that by working together, we can overcome any obstacle.
That's a powerful thought to end on. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about the lessons we can learn from the past.